Seches brachas daf chav ches. The Gemara brings the whole shaila back and forth if tefillas arvis, rishus, or choiva. In this halach of tefillas arvis, rishus, there's three shittas in Rishonim. Toises, Daf Chavav, and Daf Lamed say that tefillas arvis rishus means the mitzvah that could be nidche for other mitzvah iveres. Brings two rayas from the fact there's a question of tashlumin, if it will be just the rishus doesn't pass tashlumin. From the fact that there's a discussion on Daf Lamed that Marv and Rosh Chodesh, you don't go back because a mekadshon is a Chodesh b'layla. Weißt du, there is a mitzvah. The Bahag brought in the Rishonim over here, and the Rosh Ben Yoina say that once you start saying Marv once, b'Torah's Choyva, it's chal on you a Choyva forever. And the Kol Boy says over here, interesting thing, that it's not really a Rishus because you have to say 100 brachas every day. The Gilyoni Hashas and Matmiya, you make a bracha on other things. The Rambam's mashma that tefillas arvis is rishus, not like these Rishonim that holds the choiv. The Pshach is Meirich in Shittas a Rambam, and he brings three Rambams that are mashma that it's a rishus, a real rishus. First of all, the Rambam says when you start off davening, you can continue davening even if you made a mistake because tefillas arvis is rishus. The Rambam says you're not moitzi rami de chayvosai belayla. There's no chazaras hashatz at night, because tefillas arvis rishus. And the Rambam also writes that you're not medakdekin in the zman of Mariv. You could do even plaga mincha because tefillas arvis rishus. So the Pshach explains in the Choretz Teruchin that if it's just the rishus, then you have Tosfos kashas. How can we say that there's tashlum in a Mariv, and how can we say a question of magzirin oisoi on Rosh Chodesh? On the Arab Pshach says that even though it's rishus, once you're davening, it has a din of a tefillas choiva. That means that tefillas nedava has specific guidelines. You have to be mechadish bedava, and you have to say specifically you're doing b'teres nedava. But over here by Mariv, although you don't have to do it, but when you're doing it, when you're davening, it has the same halachis as a tefillas choiva. And therefore, that's the question is, you can make up that din tefillah that you have with tashlumin and be machzirin oisoi by Rosh Chodesh. And he explains the Rambam that says there's no chazaras hashatz is because for chazaras hashatz you need a chiyuv. Din arvus needs a chiyuv, and since there's no chiyuv b'poyol, therefore it doesn't pass chazaras hashatz. Ayin Sham is Meirich in Divrei Reb Chaim, the Ayin Sham. Rav Paler over here has a beautiful explanation in the Rambam that says the Eimedakdekim Bizman Tfilas Mariv because Tfilas Arvis Rishus. This Rambam is a Pella. The Gemara is Mavor that the word is because Plaga Minchas Laila. Why is the Rambam saying because Tfilas Arvis Rishus? So Rav Paler explains that the Agdara is that you need both of the halachas. The Ba'atzim Plaga Mincha is not really Laila. It's not Laila for other things. It only has a din Laila. And for Mariv, it's enough because Tfilas Arvis Rishus, that means that Tfilas Arvis Rishus, therefore it doesn't have its cholok from Mincha and Shachris. They have to have a Torah Shem Tfilah of Shachris and Mincha be Yesoidoi to be Meichel on a din Tfilah. However, Tfilas Arvis Rishus, it's enough to have a Kloliistic Shem Tfilah, and therefore you don't need the Zman Laila to be Meichel on a Shem Tfilah. And on a Tfilah Kazu, it's enough to have a Din Laila. You don't have to have the Torah's Laila 100%. V'ayin Sham Barichas to explain the Divrei Rambam, and then he's Marich more to explain the halacha that you find by Mariv, even a cotton ki moitzi a gadol, because you don't need a chiyuv to be mashvi a Tfilah by Mariv. Ayin Sham. Further on the Gemara, in the back and forth between Gamliel and Yeshua, it's interesting to note in this Gemara, the Mukhi Yosef has an arichas of 16 limudim that you can learn from this Gemara of Ayin Sham. The Gemara has a shayla about a Geramoini, and the question is if he's mutalov bekal and oslov bekal. And the Gemara says he is zoid that Sancheiriv was in Balbal Kol Umais, so therefore there's a roiv and there's a whole mixture between all the nations. On this Gemara, there's many kashas discussed at length by the Achronim. Very interesting questions. The Shar Melech has a kasha that he has a discussion if the halacha, same with the halacha of Mam Zavadev, Le Mam Zesofik, does that apply by the halacha of Amoini and Moyavi? And he says if you do say that it will pass this halacha of Vadev Le Sofik, so why need a roiv to be mati? Even without a roiv, it should be mutter. The Minchas Chinuch says that if it's ikvei sur, it's different. Another teretz that Achronim say is that to be mutter even the Rabbanon because of the roiv. Minchas chinuch es a kasha. That it shouldn't be a roiv. There should be kavua. All the nations are kavua b'mekoymai. If you say even when it's not nicker, there's kavua. And even when they come to Nizgayer, he says that since they're coming from a matzav of kviyas, you shouldn't have the halacha of called the parish. V'ayin sham b'minchas chinuch. The Shagis Ari is another kasha. Yes, that the Rambam paskins that Ben Ketura is chayiv in Mila. How could it be a Ben Ketura is chayiv in Mila? It should be roiv nations and not Ben Ketura, so there should be multiple roiv. On this kasha, the Chazon Yechezkel and others say that the whole Taruvis is between Ben Ketura and Bnei Yishmael, because only those two nations have a Mila and everything else is Nicker, so therefore there's no roiv. The Tzlach and Yehuda say a tremendous yistoidistic chiddush to answer this kasha. They say that the halacha of roiv was said by Yidden and not by goyim, and a goy doesn't have a halacha of a roiv, so therefore we can't say that a goy is potter from Mila because of a roiv. Minchas chinuch es, if that's the case, then everyone should be chayiv in Mila because there's no roiv, and everyone should be chayiv because maybe they're in Ben Ketura. And that is many kashas on the slach. The tzlach is himself, that the tzlach of Eishes Av. How do you know who's your father? And then he has the kasha, if you have even in a chai that's nisarev, how is a mutter to a goy? There's no bittul beroiv. The Pri Yitzchak is the kasha, that how's a loch that a goy is yoirish his father? How do you know he's his father? Only because of roiv. And if there's no roiv by a goy, how does he ashn his father? Chaim Shmulevitz in Shari Chaim says an eye-opening chiddush to explain this whole halacha. He says that there's two types of roivs. There's one halacha of roiv when the din was nemar in a matzav of vadai, like a Ben Ketura, and it happens to be that later there was a situation that's a roiv. On that we say there's a roiv, you don't have a roiv by a goy. However, there's many halachas that the whole din mi'ikr yisoidina was nemar in a situation of a roiv. That like the halacha of Yorish as Aviv, Eishes Aviv, all these halachas are specifically mentioned. The ikr din Torah was said on a situation of roiv because it's impossible without a din roiv. Because otherwise, how do you know he's his father? So therefore, in such a roiv, it's a din vadai, and such a roiv, he says even a goy has such a roiv. There's another teretz you could say, according to Kvega, that a Rubid Lesakamon maybe is different because Rubid Lesakamon's like a Vadai. The Mara Beis brings the halacha of the Tefillah of Nechuni ben Akana, and there's a kasha on the Rambam brings the Nusach. He says Lo Yekoshev the halacha, and then he says Yismich bechaveroi, and mitoich divorov of Yismich bechaveroi, he says again Lo Yekoshev the halacha. And Tzarchi and Gadol, why do you have to say it twice? The halacha is Lo Yekoshev the halacha. Pshach and Avi Ezri explains that is two separate tefillas. The Gemara says in Bava Metzia and many other places the halacha of Torah la b'shamayim. Therefore, there's a Belezer arguing the Chachamim. So although there's a pascal came out in the Shemayim that the halacha is like a Belezer, still the psak was not like a Belezer because of the roiv. So you see, although I'll pee what he was learning, it made sense to be the halacha like a Belezer, since the majority was against him. So therefore, the psak was not like a Belezer. So therefore, Pshach says there's two different bakoshas. One bakosha is the yikosh of the halacha should be able to learn al pi the limudim that the Torah was given for him, and to be masiga emes on the Torah kinisinasa. Now there's another bakosha. The yikosh of the halacha yismich, and everyone should be nicha to yipsak, and you should be niskabel yipsak, because if you don't have the hachra of the rabbim like you, then it won't be the halacha like you at all. The ayin shah.